The stranger rode into Winnetka, California, on a horse so tired it looked like death walking, and the woman watching from her father's trading post window knew without a word that this man had come from somewhere terrible and was heading somewhere worse. It was August of 1873, and the heat hung over the valley like a wool blanket, making everything shimmer and waver in the afternoon light. Tessa Shepherd had seen plenty of drifters pass through this settlement nestled in the southern California hills, but something about this one made her fingers pause on the ledger she'd been updating. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, and moved with the careful economy of someone who understood that wasted motion in this heat could kill you. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see the dark stubble on his jaw, the dust coating his clothes like a second skin. He dismounted slowly, patting his horse's neck with a gentleness that surprised her, then stood for a moment looking at the rough buildings that made up Winnetka, as if measuring them against some internal map. Her father, Joseph Shepherd, had built his trading post here 5 years ago when the settlement was barely a thought in anyone's mind. He'd seen the potential in the valley, the way travelers heading north to the goldfields or south to Los Angeles needed a place to rest and resupply. He'd been right. The settlement had grown to nearly 40 permanent residents, with a blacksmith, a small church, and a handful of other businesses clustered around the trading post. The stranger tied his horse to the rail and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch. Tessa heard the boards creak under his weight. Then the door opened and he stepped inside, bringing with him the smell of dust, leather, and pine. She looked up from her ledger, ready with her usual greeting, but the words died on her lips when she finally saw his face. He had eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and deep, and they held a kind of quiet sadness that made her chest tighten. He was young, maybe 25, with strong features and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. "Help you," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. He removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair matted with sweat. "Need supplies, grain for the horse, water if you have it fresh." His voice was low, rough from disuse or dust or both. He had an accent she couldn't quite place, somewhere from the territories maybe or further north. "We have both," Tessa said, closing the ledger. "How much grain?" "Enough for 2 weeks, and I need tools. Saw, axe, hammer, nails, plenty of nails." She raised an eyebrow, building something. He met her eyes for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, like a door opening just a crack. "Yes, madam, we have tools. My father's out back in the warehouse. I can show you what we have." He nodded, following her through the store and out the back door. The warehouse was really just a large shed with a tin roof that turned it into an oven during the day, but it held their overflow inventory, the things that didn't fit on the shelves inside. Joseph Shepherd was counting crates when they entered. He was a big man, barrel-chested and bearded, with hands like ham hocks and a voice that carried. "Tessa, who's this?" "Customer, Papa, needs tools and supplies." Joseph straightened, wiping his hands on his apron as he sized up the stranger. "You got money?" The stranger reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "Gold." Joseph's eyebrows went up. "Let's see what you need then." For the next hour, Tessa watched as the stranger carefully selected his supplies. He examined each tool with the eye of someone who knew what he was looking at, testing the weight of the axe, sighting down the length of the saw blade, checking the hammer's head for cracks. He bought 2 of everything, plus a grinding stone, rope, and enough nails to build a barn. "Were you planning to use all this?" Joseph asked as they loaded everything into burlap sacks. The stranger gestured vaguely north. "Up in the hills, near the pine forest." Tessa felt her pulse quicken. The pine forest started about 3 miles north of town, climbing up into the mountains where the air was cooler and water ran year-round in the creeks. It was beautiful country, but isolated. No one lived up there except a few trappers and the occasional prospector. "That's rough country," Joseph said. "You know what you're getting into?" "Yes, sir." "You got a name?" The stranger hesitated, then said, "Samuel Oakes." Joseph stuck out his hand. "Joseph Shepherd, this is my daughter Tessa." Samuel shook his hand, then turned to Tessa and gave a small nod. "Madam." She felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Oakes." He paid in gold dust, carefully measured on Joseph's scale, then loaded his supplies onto his horse with the same methodical care he'd shown in selecting them. Tessa found herself inventing reasons to stay near the back door, watching him work. "You need anything else?" Joseph called out. "You know where to find us." Samuel secured the last bundle, then looked back at them. His gaze lingered on Tessa for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you." He rode north, and Tessa stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared into the heat shimmer. "Interesting fellow," Joseph said from behind her, "I suppose." "Tessa, you're 22 years old. I see the way you looked at him." She felt her face flush again. "Papa, I just met him." "I know. Just be careful. Man with that much sadness in his eyes is either running from something or towards something, and either way, it's usually trouble." But Tessa couldn't stop thinking about Samuel Oakes. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the room above the trading post, she found herself wondering what he was doing in the hills. What was he building? Why was he alone? The questions circled in her mind like birds looking for a place to land. 3 days later he came back. She was restocking shelves when the door opened and he walked in, his face sunburned and his hands wrapped in makeshift bandages. "Mr. Oakes," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Miss Shepherd." He removed his hat. "I need medical supplies. Bandages, salve if you have it. And more water." She came around the counter, concern overriding her shyness. "Are you hurt?" "Just blisters from the work." "Let me see." He hesitated, then held out his hands. She unwrapped the bandages carefully and had to suppress a gasp. His palms were raw and bleeding, covered in broken blisters that spoke of hard, unrelenting labor. "Mr. Oakes, you can't work like this. You'll get infection." "I have to." "Why? What are you building up there that's worth destroying your hands?" He looked at her with those storm cloud eyes, and for a moment she thought he might actually tell her. Instead, he said, "Something important." She led him to the back room where they kept the medical supplies, made him sit on a stool and fetched warm water and clean cloth. As she cleaned his wounds, she was acutely aware of how close they were, of the heat radiating from his skin, of the way his breath caught when she touched a particularly tender spot. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "It's all right. You have gentle hands." The compliment, so simple and sincere, made her heart skip. "You should rest for a few days. Let these heal." "Can't." "Why not?" He was quiet for a long time, watching her wrap his hands in fresh bandages. Finally, he said, "Because summer doesn't last forever." It was a strange answer, but something in the way he said it made her think it was the truest thing he'd told her yet. She finished bandaging his hands, then prepared a bundle of extra medical supplies. "Take these, and promise me you'll change the bandages every day." "I promise." Their eyes met and held. Tessa felt something pass between them, some unspoken understanding that made her breath catch in her throat. "Thank you," he said softly. "You're welcome." He came back the following week and the week after that. Always for supplies, always with the same quiet courtesy, always with new injuries that spoke of punishing labor. Blisters that healed only to reappear. Rope burns on his shoulders, a gash on his forearm from a slipped axe. Tessa began to look forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She found herself choosing her dresses more carefully on the days she thought he might appear, pinning her dark hair back just so, lingering over the medical supplies when she restocked them. Joseph noticed, of course. "He's been up there nearly a month now," he said one evening as they ate dinner. "Working alone from what I can tell. He seems determined. Stubborn, more like. Man's going to work himself to death." Joseph stabbed a piece of beef with his fork. "You fancy him, don't you, Papa? Don't papa me. I've got eyes. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Tessa set down her fork. "What can I do? He's never said more than 10 words to me at a time. Then maybe you should be the one doing the talking. Life's too short to wait around for other people to make the first move, Tessa. Your mama, God rest her soul, she's the one who asked me to dance at that barn raising back in Missouri. If she'd waited for me to work up the courage, you might never have been born." The next time Samuel came to the trading post, Tessa was ready. It was late September now, and the heat had finally broken, leaving the valley awash in golden autumn light. He looked thinner than when she'd first seen him, his face gaunt with exhaustion, but there was something else in his expression too, something like satisfaction. "Miss Shepherd," he said, tipping his hat. "Mr. Oakes. The usual supplies." "Yes, madam, and I need to ask you something." Her heart leaped. Of course. He shifted his weight, looking almost nervous for the first time since she'd met him. "I wonder if you might know anyone in town who does sewing. I need curtains made, and bedding." Curtains. Bedding. The words hung in the air between them. "I do sewing," Tessa heard herself say. "I could make them for you if you tell me the measurements." Relief washed over his face. "I'd be grateful. I can pay you." "I'd need to see the windows, to make sure I get it right." It was forward, bold even, but she didn't care. If he was building something with windows and needed bedding, she wanted to know what it was. Samuel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Would you ride up tomorrow? I could show you." "Yes." The single word felt like a leap off a cliff. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Tessa dressed in her split riding skirt and a practical blouse, then saddled her mare, Daisy, while Joseph watched from the porch with a knowing smile. "You be back before dark," he called. "I will, Papa. And Tessa, keep your eyes open. I still don't know what that man's about." Samuel was waiting for her where the trail to the pine forest began, sitting easy in his saddle despite his injuries. He touched his hat brim when he saw her. "Miss Shepherd, thank you for coming. I'm curious to see what you've been working on, Mr. Oakes. Then let me show you." They rode north together, climbing into the hills where the oak and sage gave way to tall pines that whispered in the breeze. The air grew cooler, sweeter, filled with the scent of resin and earth. Tessa breathed deeply, feeling some tension she hadn't known she was carrying ease from her shoulders. "It's beautiful up here," she said. "Yes, that's why I chose it." "Chose it for what?" He glanced at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "You'll see." They climbed higher, following a narrow trail that wound between the trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches in golden shafts, and somewhere nearby she could hear the sound of running water. Then the trail opened into a clearing, and Tessa drew her horse to a stop, her breath catching in her throat. In the center of the clearing stood a house. It was a real house, not a rough cabin but an actual home, built from pine logs that still smelled fresh and clean. It had a peaked roof, real glass windows that caught the morning light, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The craftsmanship was evident even from a distance. Each log fitted precisely to the next, the corners notched with expert care. "You built this," she whispered. "Alone." Samuel dismounted and stood looking at the house with an expression that was part pride, part something else, something deeper. 200 trees. I felled them, stripped them, hauled them, fitted them, every single one. But why? Why build something like this out here? He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her heart hammer against her ribs. Because I needed to prove I could, that I was worthy of it. Worthy of what? Instead of answering, he held up his hand to help her dismount. She took it, feeling the rough bandages under her fingers, and let him guide her down from the saddle. "Come inside," he said quietly. The interior took her breath away. The main room was large and open, with a stone fireplace at one end and real wooden floors that had been sanded smooth. There was a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a table he'd clearly made himself from pine planks, and doorways leading to what looked like 2 bedrooms. Everything was raw and new, smelling of fresh wood and possibility. "Samuel," she said, forgetting formality in her amazement, "this is incredible." He stood in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun, watching her explore. "I wanted it to be right, perfect. He stopped, shook his head. "Before you what?" He crossed the room to where she stood by the fireplace and pulled something from his pocket. It was a small piece of paper, worn soft from handling. He unfolded it carefully and held it out to her. It was a drawing, done in careful pencil strokes. A drawing of her. Tessa stared at it, her mind reeling. It showed her standing in the trading post, her head bent over the counter, a strand of hair falling across her cheek. It was unmistakably her, captured with an artist's eye for detail. "I drew this the first day I saw you," Samuel said, his voice rough. "I'd ridden for 3 months to get here, running from a life I didn't want, looking for a place to start over. And then I walked into your father's store and saw you, and I knew." "Knew what?" "That I'd found what I was looking for, that you were the reason I'd come all this way." Tessa looked up from the drawing, her eyes meeting his. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you're kind because of how you treated my hands even when you were angry at me for hurting them. I know you're brave because you rode up here alone to meet a stranger. I know you're beautiful in a way that makes my chest hurt every time I see you." He took a shaky breath. "And I know I had no right to feel any of this without proving I could give you something worthy of you. So I built this house. For you. For us, if you'll have me." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Tessa gripped the edge of the fireplace mantel to steady herself. "You built an entire house before you even spoke to me about this. I'm not good with words, Miss Shepherd, never have been, but I'm good with my hands. I'm good at building things, making things last. I wanted to show you that before I asked." "Asked what?" He dropped to one knee right there on the raw pine floor, and Tessa felt tears spring to her eyes. "Tessa Shepherd, I know this is sudden. I know you have every reason to think I'm crazy. But I'm asking you to take a chance on me. To let me court you properly, to give me time to prove I can make you happy. And if, at the end of that time, you feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, I'm asking you to marry me and make this house a home." She stared at him, this strange, quiet man who had felled 200 trees to build her a home before he'd said a word of love. It was insane. It was impractical. It was the most romantic thing she'd ever heard. "Stand up," she said softly. He rose slowly, uncertainty flickering across his face. Tessa stepped forward and took his bandaged hands in hers. "Tell me about yourself, not about the house, about you, where you came from, why you left, everything." Relief flooded his expression. He led her to the table, and they sat across from each other as the morning light grew stronger through the windows. "I was born in Oregon Territory," he began. "My father was a timberman, had a small operation in the forests near Portland. He taught me everything about trees, how to read them, how to fell them clean, how to turn them into something useful. He died when I was 19 and my older brother inherited the business. You didn't get along with your brother." "We got along fine until he married a woman who didn't want me around. She convinced him to buy me out, pay me off. So I took the money and started drifting. Worked timber camps from Oregon to Colorado, saved every penny I made. I kept moving south, looking for something, though I didn't know what. Until I found it. You mean me? You, he said it simply, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. I'd heard about the valley, about how it was growing. I thought maybe I'd start my own small operation, cutting timber for the settlements. But then I walked into your father's store and all those plans just scattered like leaves in the wind. Tessa felt her throat tighten. Samuel, I'm flattered, truly, but you can't just decide you love someone after one meeting. Can I? His eyes held her steadily. Tell me you didn't feel it too, that moment when our eyes met. Tell me you haven't thought about me even once since that first day. She wanted to lie to protect herself, but the words wouldn't come. I've thought about you, she admitted quietly. Every day. I've wondered what you were doing up here, why you looked so sad, whether you were eating enough, whether your hands were healing. Then give me a chance. Let me court you the right way. I'll come to town every Sunday. We'll walk together, talk, let you get to know me. And if after a few months you don't want this, I'll accept it and move on. But please, Tessa, don't say no without giving us a chance. She looked around the beautiful house he'd built with his own bleeding hands, looked at the hope and vulnerability in his face, and felt something in her chest crack open. 3 months, she said. Come to Sunday dinner at our house for 3 months. My father can get to know you too. And at the end of that time, if we both still feel this way, we'll talk about marriage. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. 3 months. I can do 3 months. She stood, and he stood with her. On impulse, she reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble under her palm. I'll make your curtains, and your bedding, but I'm making them hopeful, Samuel Oakes. I'm making them like I believe this is going to work. He covered her hand with his, pressing it against his face. It will work. I'll make sure of it. They measured the windows together, Tessa writing down the dimensions in a small notebook she'd brought. There were 6 windows in total, plus the 2 bedroom windows, and she found herself already planning the fabric, imagining how the house would look with curtains stirring in the breeze. As they worked, Samuel told her more about his life. He'd been 24 when he left Oregon, spent a year drifting before ending up in California. He'd turned 26 just last month, working alone in the forest. He liked his coffee black, could play the harmonica but not well, and had a deep fear of rattlesnakes that made her laugh. A big, strong timber man afraid of snakes. They're sneaky, he said with mock seriousness. At least with a tree, you know where it's going to fall. She learned that he could read and write, unusual for a timber man because his mother had been a school teacher before she married. That he'd built his first piece of furniture, a stool, when he was 7 years old. That he dreamed of having children someday, teaching them what his father had taught him. By the time the sun was high overhead, Tessa knew she was in trouble. Not because Samuel was anything other than he seemed, but because she was already half in love with him and she'd only really known him a few hours. I should get back, she said reluctantly. Papa will worry. I'll ride with you part way. They rode down the mountain together, and when they reached the point where the trail forked, one path leading to town and the other back to his house, they stopped. Sunday dinner, Tessa said. Don't be late. My father doesn't tolerate tardiness. I'll be there at noon sharp, and Samuel. Maybe take a few days to rest. Let your hands heal. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face, chasing away the sadness she'd seen that first day. Yes, madam. She rode home with her heart singing, the measurements for his curtains folded carefully in her pocket. That evening, as she and Joseph prepared dinner, she told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his face carefully neutral. So this man builds you a house and proposes before he's even courted you proper. Joseph said finally. That's either the most romantic thing I've heard or the craziest. Maybe both. And you said yes to the courting. I said 3 months. That's all. Just to see if this is real or just some wild notion. Joseph studied her face. You already know it's real, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks. Is that so wrong, to know your own heart? No, honey, it's not wrong. Just scary for your old papa who's going to have to let you go. He pulled her into a hug. But if it's what you want, truly want, then I'll support you. Just promise me you'll be smart about this. Take the full 3 months. Make sure he's the man he seems to be. I promise, Papa. That night, Tessa started work on the curtains. She chose a sturdy muslin for the main rooms, practical but with a delicate floral print that would catch the light. For the bedroom windows, she selected a softer cotton in pale blue, the color of morning sky. As she cut and pinned and sewed, she let herself imagine living in that house, waking up to the sound of wind in the pines, cooking at that big stove, sitting on the porch in the evening with Samuel beside her. Sunday came faster than she expected. She dressed in her best dress, a deep green that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes, and helped her father prepare a proper dinner. Roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie she'd made the day before. Samuel arrived exactly at noon, riding down the main street of Winnetka on his horse, now well-fed and glossy. He'd cleaned up, shaved, and wore clothes that, while simple, were clearly his best. He carried a bouquet of wildflowers that he'd obviously picked that morning, their stems still wet with dew. "Miss Shepherd," he said, handing her the flowers. "Mr. Shepherd." "Samuel," Joseph said, shaking his hand. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." That first Sunday dinner was awkward, full of long silences and careful conversation. But Joseph was a fair man, and he asked Samuel about his work, his plans, his intentions. Samuel answered honestly, his voice steady, and gradually the tension eased. "You know anything about running a business?" Joseph asked over pie. "Some. My father's timber operation wasn't large, but I kept the books for him the last 2 years before he died. We've been getting more requests for lumber lately, people building, expanding. I've been thinking about adding it to what we offer at the store, but I don't know enough about timber to do it right." Samuel leaned forward, interest sparking in his eyes. "I could help with that. I know which trees to cut and which to leave, how to season the wood properly. If you wanted a partner in that part of the business, I'd be interested." Joseph and Tessa exchanged glances. "Let's see how the next few months go," Joseph said, "but I'm not opposed to the idea." After dinner, Samuel and Tessa walked down to the creek that ran along the edge of town. The afternoon was warm, the sky cloudless, and they found a spot under a willow tree where they could sit and watch the water flow past. "Your father's a good man," Samuel said. "He is. He's been both mother and father to me since Mama died. I was 12. I'm sorry, that must have been hard." "It was. But Papa never let me feel alone. He taught me the business, treated me like a partner instead of just a daughter. Some people think it's strange, a woman running a trading post, but he never cared what people thought." "I don't think it's strange. I think it's admirable." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek babble and the birds sing in the willows. "I brought you something," Samuel said suddenly. He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and handed it to her. Tessa opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a carving of a horse no bigger than her thumb. It was exquisitely detailed, every line of muscle and mane rendered with perfect precision. "Samuel, this is beautiful. Did you make it? Carving helps me think. I made it this week while my hands were healing." He looked almost shy. "I wanted you to have something from me, something that wasn't just about the house." She closed her fingers around the tiny horse, feeling its smooth curves. "I'll treasure it, thank you." The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Samuel came to Sunday dinner, and each week he and Joseph grew more comfortable with each other, their conversation ranging from timber prices to town politics to the best way to train a horse. Samuel brought small gifts each time, always something he'd made himself. A wooden spoon, a carved box, a set of bookends shaped like pine trees. And each Sunday after dinner, he and Tessa would walk. Sometimes to the creek, sometimes just around town, sometimes out into the hills where they could see the whole valley spread out below them. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each passing week. Tessa learned that Samuel had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. That he was thoughtful and careful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. That he listened when she talked about her dreams of expanding the trading post, maybe adding a library or a school for the growing town. "You should do it," he said one afternoon as they sat on a hillside watching clouds drift past. "The library, I mean. This town's going to keep growing. It needs someone with vision. It takes money, more than we have right now, but not more than you could have. Especially if the timber business works out." She leaned back on her hands, studying his profile. "You really think my father will make you a partner?" "I think he's considering it. He's been asking a lot of questions about operations, profit margins, sustainable harvesting. Those aren't casual questions. Would you want that, to be tied to the business here?" He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Tessa, I'd want anything that keeps me near you. The timber business, working in the store, breaking rocks, I don't care. As long as I'm here." The months passed faster than Tessa wanted them to. Samuel proved himself over and over, not just to her but to the whole town. He helped the blacksmith repair his forge when it cracked. He built new steps for the church when the old ones rotted through. He worked with Joseph on a trial timber delivery, selecting and cutting trees with such expertise that the buyer came back asking for more. By November, the whole town knew Samuel Oakes was courting Tessa Shepherd, and most approved. The few who had reservations about the quiet stranger were won over when he organized a barn raising for the widow Patterson, whose husband had died, leaving her with 3 small children and a leaking roof. Tessa watched him work that day, leading the other men with quiet competence, and felt her heart swell with pride and something deeper, something that went bone deep and made her certain. She finished the curtains in early December, along with a beautiful quilt for the bed she'd sewn from scraps of fabric in shades of blue and green. She wrapped them carefully and brought them to Sunday dinner. "These are for the house," she said, handing Samuel the bundle. "I hope they're what you wanted." He unwrapped them slowly, running his work-roughened hands over the fabric. When he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "They're perfect, better than perfect." "Tessa," he stopped, glanced at Joseph, then back at her. "Can we talk, alone?" Her father cleared his throat. "I'll just go check on something in the store." When they were alone, Samuel took both her hands in his. The bandages were long gone now, replaced by calluses and new scars, the marks of his labor. "It's been almost 3 months," he said, "and I need to know. Have I proved myself? Do you think you could love me? Could you see yourself in that house, building a life with me?" Tessa looked into his storm-cloud eyes and saw her future there, clear and bright and certain. "I don't think I could love you, Samuel. I know I do. I've been in love with you since that day you took me to see the house, maybe even before that." The joy that flooded his face was beautiful to see. "Then marry me, please. Make me the happiest man in California and marry me." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this. I know you will." They were married 3 weeks later, just before Christmas, in the small church in Winnetka. Tessa wore her mother's wedding dress, which Joseph had kept carefully preserved all these years. Samuel wore a new suit he'd bought specially for the occasion, looking uncomfortable but happy in the starched collar. The whole town turned out for the wedding. Widow Patterson brought her children, all scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best. The blacksmith served as Samuel's best man. And Joseph walked Tessa down the aisle with tears streaming down his face, though he was smiling. "You take care of my girl," he whispered to Samuel as he placed Tessa's hand in his. "With my life, sir." The preacher kept it simple, just the traditional vows and a blessing. And then Samuel was kissing her again, this time in front of God and everyone, and Tessa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They held the reception in the trading post, which Joseph had closed for the day and decorated with pine boughs and candles. There was music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. Samuel surprised everyone by pulling out a harmonica and playing a sweet, simple melody that had Tessa wiping away tears. "I told you I wasn't good," he said afterward, looking embarrassed. "You're perfect," she told him. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and rode north together, toward the house in the pines. Samuel had spent the previous week preparing it, hauling up furniture and supplies, hanging the curtains she'd made, spreading the quilt on the bed. He'd even built a rocking chair for the porch, thinking ahead to future evenings they'd spend watching the stars come out. When they arrived, he insisted on carrying her across the threshold, making her laugh with his serious expression as he maneuvered through the door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Oakes," he said, setting her down gently. Tessa looked around at the house that love had built, at the man who had felled 200 pines to prove himself worthy of her, and felt a peace settle over her that she'd never known before. "Welcome home," she echoed. Their first months of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Living together in the isolated house meant learning each other's rhythms, their habits and preferences. Samuel was an early riser, up before dawn to check the animals or work on various projects. Tessa liked to stay up late reading by lamplight, losing herself in books she ordered from San Francisco. They learned to accommodate each other, Samuel teaching himself to move quietly in the mornings so he wouldn't wake her, Tessa making sure dinner was ready when he came in from his work, both tired and hungry. The intimacy of marriage was new for both of them, a sweet awkwardness that gradually gave way to comfort and then to passion. Samuel was gentle and patient, and Tessa found herself grateful for his careful nature, the way he paid attention to her needs and responses. The house became a home as they filled it with the small details of their lives. Tessa's books on shelves Samuel built, his tools carefully organized in the shed he constructed behind the house. A kitchen garden they planted together in the spring, working side by side to turn the rocky soil. Samuel's partnership with Joseph became official that spring. They established a small timber operation with Samuel doing the cutting and selecting while Joseph handled the business end. It was modest but profitable, and it meant Samuel could spend less time traveling for work and more time at home. The town of Winnetka continued to grow, and Tessa's dream of a library inched closer to reality. She began collecting books, setting aside space in the trading post for them, letting people borrow on the honor system. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By their first anniversary, Tessa knew she was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks, but when she finally missed her third monthly cycle, she was certain. She told Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply. He went very still, his rocking chair ceasing its motion. Then he turned to her with wonder written all over his face. "A baby, are you sure?" "I'm sure." He pulled her onto his lap, holding her like she was made of glass. "A baby," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "Tessa, I don't have words. You don't need words. Just hold me." They sat like that as the stars came out, wrapped in each other and the knowledge that their family was growing. The pregnancy was not easy. Tessa was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. Samuel fretted over her constantly, cooking bland foods she could tolerate, holding her hair back when she was ill, rubbing her feet when they swelled. Joseph rode up to check on them regularly, bringing supplies and news from town. He was thrilled about becoming a grandfather, already making plans for a cradle he would build, a rocking horse he would carve. As Tessa's belly grew, Samuel became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, work less, take no chances. She found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. "Samuel, I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still gather eggs. What if you fall? What if the rooster attacks you? The rooster is terrified of me and you know it." But she indulged him because she understood the fear beneath his fussing. He'd lost his parents, been cast out by his brother. This baby, this family they were building, it meant everything to him. The baby came in early October, after a long and difficult labor that left Samuel white-faced and shaking. The midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, handled everything with calm efficiency while Samuel paced outside like a caged animal. When it was finally over, and Mrs. Chen emerged to tell him he had a son, he nearly collapsed with relief. "Can I see them? Give us a few minutes to clean up." Then yes. When he finally entered the bedroom, Tessa was propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Samuel approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son's red, wrinkled face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He has your eyes. Look, that same gray." Samuel reached out a tentative finger and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. The look on Samuel's face in that moment, the pure, overwhelming love, made Tessa's eyes fill with tears. "What should we name him?" she asked. They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Samuel said, "Thomas, after your mother's father, if that's all right with you." Tessa felt her throat tighten. Her grandfather Thomas had died before she was born, but her mother had spoken of him often, a kind man who'd loved stories and laughter. "Thomas Oakes, it's perfect." They settled into the rhythm of new parenthood, sleepless nights and endless feeding, the constant worry that every parent knows. But they navigated it together, Samuel walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, Tessa nursing him while Samuel read aloud to both of them. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. By 6 months he was rolling over, by 9 months pulling himself up on furniture. He had Samuel's quiet nature, watching the world with serious eyes, but when he smiled, it was pure sunshine. The timber business continued to grow, and when Thomas was a year old, Joseph proposed expanding it, hiring a few men to help with the cutting so Samuel wouldn't have to do it all himself. "You've got a family now," Joseph said. "You shouldn't be spending so much time away from them." They hired 2 men from town, young but capable, and Samuel taught them his methods, his careful approach to selecting trees and planning cuts. It freed up his time considerably, letting him be home more, letting him watch his son grow and change. Tessa's library dream took a step forward when a wealthy merchant passing through Winnetka donated 200 books, and enough money to build a small, dedicated building. The town rallied, and Samuel led another construction project, this time building a beautiful little library with tall windows and shelves that ran floor to ceiling. The dedication ceremony was held on a sunny spring day when Thomas was 2. The boy toddled around the new building, his chubby hands reaching for books he couldn't yet read, and Tessa felt a swell of gratitude for the life they'd built. That night, as they lay in bed with Thomas asleep in his cradle beside them, Samuel said, "I want another baby." Tessa turned to him in surprise. "Already, I love our life. I love watching you be a mother. I want more of this. More children, more love, more everything." She smiled in the darkness. "Then I suppose we should work on that." Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born 2 years after Thomas. She was tiny and fierce, with dark hair like her mother and a cry that could wake the dead. Samuel was smitten from the moment he saw her, this little girl who looked at him with such trust. "2 babies," he said, holding Sarah while Thomas leaned against his knee. "I'm the luckiest man alive." The years flowed past like water in the creek, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books like his mother and had his father's gift for working with wood. Sarah was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees or chasing animals, keeping them constantly on their toes. A third child, another boy they named James, arrived when Sarah was 3. He was the perfect combination of his siblings, thoughtful but playful, serious but quick to laugh. The house that Samuel had built for love expanded to accommodate their growing family. He added a new wing with 2 more bedrooms, a larger kitchen, a proper dining room. Each addition was crafted with the same care as the original, every board fitted precisely, every nail driven true. The timber business became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality and fair dealing. Samuel took on more partners, expanding operations while maintaining his careful stewardship of the forest. He taught his employees to take only what was needed, to replant where they could, to think of the future. Tessa's library became the heart of the community, a place where children learned and adults gathered to discuss ideas. She added a small school, hiring a young teacher from San Francisco, fulfilling another dream. Joseph grew older, his beard going white, his step slowing, but he remained active in the business until his health finally forced him to step back. He moved into a small cottage near the library, close to town but with a view of the hills where his daughter and grandchildren lived. "I did all right, didn't I?" he said to Tessa one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "Giving you to Samuel. You did perfectly, Papa." "I've never been happier. Your mama would be proud. Of both of us." He died peacefully in his sleep a week later, a smile on his face. They buried him next to Tessa's mother in the cemetery on the hill, and the whole town turned out to mourn a man who'd helped build their community from nothing. Tessa grieved deeply, but she had Samuel and her children to sustain her, and gradually the sharp pain dulled to a sweet ache, a missing that was part love and part gratitude for all he'd given her. The children grew. Thomas showed an interest in the timber business, following his father into the forest, learning to read the trees the way Samuel had learned from his own father. Sarah, to everyone's surprise, developed a passion for mathematics and business, taking over the financial side of operations when she was barely 16. James became the builder, his hands as skilled as his father's had been, crafting furniture and houses with the same dedication and care. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Tessa back to the clearing where the house stood, now surrounded by smaller buildings, corrals, a thriving homestead. "You remember what I told you that first day I brought you here?" he asked. that you'd felled 200 pines, that you built it to prove you were worthy. And was I worthy of you? She looked at the house, weathered now but still solid, still beautiful. She thought of the 20 years they'd spent within its walls, the love and laughter and tears, the children they'd raised, the life they'd built together. Samuel Oakes, you were worthy of me the moment you decided to try. The house was beautiful, but it was your heart I fell in love with. Your kindness, your determination, your quiet strength. The house was just wood and nails. You were everything. He pulled her close, kissing her with the same sweet intensity as their first kiss. I love you, Tessa, more now than even then, if that's possible. It's possible. Because I feel the same way. They stood together in the clearing, two people who'd taken a chance on love and built something that would last long after they were gone. The years continued their march. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and chaos. Thomas married a girl from town and built his own house on the property, raising his family in the shadow of the pines his father had felled. Sarah moved to San Francisco to work with a large timber company, though she returned often, always bringing gifts and stories. James stayed close to home, building houses throughout the valley, each one crafted with love. Samuel's hair went gray, then white. His hands became gnarled with arthritis, but he still carved small figures for his grandchildren, horses and bears and birds. Tessa's eyes weakened, requiring spectacles for reading, but she still managed the library, now expanded to fill an entire building. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration in town. The whole community came, multiple generations who'd been touched by the quiet man who'd come to Winnetka so many years ago, and the woman who'd had the courage to believe in him. Speeches were made, toasts offered, and through it all Samuel and Tessa sat hand in hand, watching the people they loved celebrate the life they'd built. That night back in their house, alone for the first time in weeks with all the children and grandchildren finally gone home, they sat on the porch in the rocking chairs Samuel had made so many years ago. 40 years, Tessa said, her hand still in his. It doesn't seem possible. Best 40 years of my life. Mine too. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind in the pines, the same wind that had whispered through the trees when Samuel first felled them, when he'd built this house from love and hope and determination. You have any regrets? Tessa asked. Samuel thought about it seriously, the way he thought about everything. Only one. I wish I'd had the courage to speak to you sooner. We could have had more time. We've had plenty of time. And besides, I loved that you built the house first. It was the most romantic thing anyone's ever done. I just wanted to be worthy of you. You always were, my love, from the very first moment. They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, bright and clear in the mountain sky. The same stars that had watched over them for 40 years, that would watch over their children and grandchildren for years to come. When they finally went inside, Samuel banked the fire while Tessa blew out the lamps. They climbed into bed, the same bed he'd built before they were married, covered by quilts their daughters and granddaughters had made. I love you, Tessa Oakes, Samuel said into the darkness. I love you, Samuel Oakes, today, tomorrow, and always. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms in the house that love had built, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, a love well tended, a promise kept. Samuel lived to see his 80th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. He died peacefully one autumn morning, sitting in his rocking chair on the porch, looking out at the forest he'd loved so well. Tessa found him there, a smile on his face, at peace. She grieved deeply, but not hopelessly, because he'd given her too much joy for that. She stayed in the house, cared for by her children and grandchildren, still managing the library when her health allowed, still telling anyone who would listen about the man who'd felled 200 pines to build her a home before he'd said a word of love. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown and started on their own lives, long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild. And when she died, peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning with the window open and the smell of pine in the air, they buried her next to Samuel on the hill overlooking the valley. The house still stands, now maintained by the family foundation the children established, a testament to the power of love and dedication. Couples come from all over to see it, to hear the story of the quiet cowboy who built a home to prove his worth, and the brave woman who saw past the gesture to the heart beneath. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, some say you can still hear the sound of 2 rocking chairs creaking on the porch, keeping time with a love that built something lasting, something true, something that will endure as long as the pines still grow tall on the mountain. The legacy of Samuel and Tessa Oaks lives on in their descendants, in the thriving town of Winnetka, in the forests that are still carefully tended using the methods Samuel taught. But more than that, it lives in the story itself, the reminder that true love isn't found in grand gestures alone, but in the everyday dedication, the choosing each other again and again, the building of a life together one day at a time. He felled 200 pines that summer. He built her a home before he said a word, and in doing so, he built something far greater than a house. He built a legacy of love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of patience, dedication, and a heart brave enough to prove itself worthy. Their story became legend in the valley, told and retold, each generation adding their own details while keeping the essential truth intact. The house became a landmark, a destination for those seeking inspiration or hope. And always at the center of the story, there remained that one essential truth. That love, real love, is proved not in words but in action, not in promises but in the keeping of them, not in a moment but in a lifetime of moments strung together like beads on a thread, each one precious, each one part of something larger and more beautiful than could ever be expressed in mere words. The house stands still, the pines grow tall, and the love story of Samuel and Tessa Oaks continues to inspire all who hear it. A reminder that sometimes the greatest romance begins not with words, but with the steady, determined work of building something meant to last forever.